let's look at the event that happened today in 1862. And first of all, this incident happened in Mankato, Minnesota. That time period, a lot of Swedish immigrants and German immigrants were living in that area. And the government made treaties with the Dakota people that were in that area so that these immigrants could then go in there and farm. And there was an incident in which the government was starting to not live up to its end of the bargain. And the racism was really bad coming from the Swedish and German immigrants. There were some priests that were trying to help the Indians. So in this treaty, the Indians were to get a certain amount of money at the end of the year. And they're supposed to live on that for the whole year. But what they did was there was a trading post that had all goods and stuff like that. And what he would do is he would credit. He would give credit to families. So whatever they took, he would write that down in his ledgers. And so when the money came in, the Indian agent there on that reservation would take the money out that was owed to the trader, and then whatever was left was given to the Indians, which seemed fair. An Indian agent is a white man, okay? He's appointed from Washington, D.C. He is to be the voice of the reservations, because in those days, Indians are not speaking English yet. So he's running the reservation for on behalf of the Indians. So whenever there's something that Washington needs done, he's the one that gets it done. Okay? That's an Indian agent. So, like I said, in these treaties with these Dakota people, they received money at the end of the year, or a certain time of the year, and it would go to the Indian agent. And then he would meet with the trader, and they would figure out, okay, this family owes this much and so forth, and then whatever's left goes to the family. That seems fair, okay? Now, the trader actually was overcharging the Indians. So he was making more money than he was supposed to, which means the Indians had actually less to deal with because the trader was overcharging them, okay? So it was in early December or so, or maybe even a little bit before, where Indians are running out of food now. And see, they can't hunt like they used to because they're on reservation. These treaties were saying that there will be peace as long as the Indians stay on the reservation and that the white people stay on their part. But these reservations were so small. And one of them looks like a long line, actually. It's just weird. Yeah, it's long. Many miles long, but just a few miles wide. It's just ridiculous. Deer don't just run down that line. Do you see what I'm saying? So it makes it really bad. So Indians are starting to starve, and their money was supposed to be in at a certain time. It comes on a train, and that wasn't coming in. So they were going to the store owner, the trader. They were asking him for extension of credit, but the store owner said no. And now the Indians are getting upset, their leaders, and they're meeting with the Indian agent and the military there. And they're saying, people are starving and we need food. And one of the leaders there said, well, if the Indians are hungry, let them eat grass. And when that was translated into Dakota, that's when all hell broke loose. And now begins what's known as the Sioux uprising of 1862. And for several weeks, Dakota people, in their minds, the treaties were broken, so they went attacking the farmers and raiding their crops and things like that. And the Civil War is going on, so there's not much U.S. troops that can get up there to help them. So it was a lot of hell raising going on. Yeah? A lot of people were dying on both sides. And they got to that store owner, and he tried to run, and they killed him, and they put some grass in his mouth. And they were saying, hey, you eat grass. That's what they were saying. Now, eventually, the military did arrive, the army did arrive, and they were able to stop the attacks. And in so doing, they arrested a bunch of Indians, and they were leading them to Mankato in Minnesota. And as they were going through one of these towns, this is a well-documented thing that I'm going to tell you, okay? Because it was in the newspaper. When they were going through this town, the white people were standing on the sides, the sideboards. That's what they had before sidewalks. And they were watching the Indians go by, and they were cussing at the Indians and throwing shit at the Indians and things like that. And here, one white lady saw this Indian carrying a baby, and so the white lady ran over there really fast, and she must have been kind of big because she overpowered that Indian lady, took off with the Indian baby, and then she went to a tree and started slamming that baby into the tree repeatedly. By the time the soldiers got there to stop her, the baby was just mutilated. It was just smashed. There was no face anymore. And as she was doing this, the community was cheering her on. That was the level of hatred. Now, at this point, you have to be careful. Because a lot of Indians, when they hear this, and I can't keep it back because it is the truth, but at this point, you have to stop. Because if you start getting angry, see now, when you look at this event, for people who are dualistic, it fuels their hatred. It fuels their racism. It fuels their idea that all white people are this way. See, they're acting only on emotion. When you're dualistic, you only perceive 33% of reality. And it's when you communicate only from emotion, that number gets smaller. So you're not seeing the fullness of reality. So that's what's causing people to say this is how white people are. This is not true. Not all white people are this way. Not all white people are bad. Not all Indians are good. That's very important to keep in mind. Okay? That's really important. So then they're taken to this brig, kind of a military prison, and there's several hundred people that were warriors that were found guilty in an illegal court with no representation. They were found guilty of murders, and in many instances, they didn't even commit the murders. So word got back to Abraham Lincoln, who was the president at that time, and he said that, you can't hang this much people, several hundred people, over 200 people. So President Lincoln gave an order saying, get the most vicious ones, and that ended up being 38 Dakotas. So he signed the document issuing their hanging. So this military built a device in which all 38 men were going to be hung at the same time. So when that happened, that town came out as if it was the 4th of July. They were celebrating, even though it was winter time. They brought picnic baskets out, and like they were gathering for a concert or something to watch these Indians get hung. They rigged it so that the hangman just moves one lever, and then all 38 men are hung at the same time. And when that lever was pushed forward and those men went down, the crowd cheered like their football team scored. Again, we have to stop here and examine your emotions. Keep that hatred in check, because this is going to lead you to an unhealthy road where you're not going to see all of clarity, and you're being irresponsible to yourself. You are denying good things to come to you as long as you have hatred like that. So you really have to be careful at this point too. And again, not all white people are bad, and not all Indians are good. Good and bad exist everywhere. So after that, the people were shipped on a boat down the Mississippi River, then up the Missouri River. So they're going south first, and then the Missouri River connects to the Mississippi River. So once they came to that area, then now they're going back north again, but this time into South Dakota, into a place today that's known as Fort Thompson, South Dakota. And these Dakota people are sent there, and that's where a reservation is made for them. So originally they're from Minnesota, and they ended up in Fort Thompson, South Dakota, which is several hundred miles away. It's a long way. And so the descendants of those people are still there. They live in an area called Bad Nation. It's Oyate Shike, Bad Nation. This is not because the Indians that were living there were bad. No, it's this is where a lot of criminals hid. Yeah, gunfighters. Yeah, because nobody went there. It's so desolate. So that's why they called it Bad Nation. It wasn't about the Indians. It was about the gunfighters and the Wild West bad people that were living there. So that's where they are today. Their descendants are there. And it didn't get better. During this boat ride, we're talking like in the winter time here, people were not doing too good. A lot of people were dying, and so they just threw them in the water. There were 2 more people that were hung a few days later. They were caught in some other location, and then they hung them too. So today they honor these. They call it the Dakota 38 plus 2. These Dakota people ended up on Crow Creek Sioux Reservation today. That's the name of their reservation, Crow Creek Sioux Tribe. And the community there is called Fort Thompson. So this is really not their homeland. They are not in their homeland. Their homeland is in Minnesota. So the Dakota people that live there technically they're not from there. So they had everything taken from them. They lost everything in this uprising. And after this incident was over, one of the chiefs and his son were picking cherries out in the country. And here a farmer happened upon them, and he killed the father. And it turned out the father was one of the chiefs. And so what they did was they skinned the face off the chief. And they had that skin along with the hair still attached. They displayed this at the World's Fair in Chicago. You can still find pictures of this on the internet. Just Google it. You can find it. And it's just amazing how this is early America, that they allowed this to happen and people celebrated. And that was a sentiment of America towards Indian people. And this is a time period where the American government wanted the scientists to prove that Indians are animals. So when they had these massacres, they would cut off human heads and send them to museums to do research on the heads to try to prove their theory that Indians are animals, not humans. So they felt this was okay to display a human face like this. And people would go by and gawk at it, cuss at it, stuff like that. And again, we have to stop and say, hey, wait a minute, be careful here. Don't be judging all white people as this way, because it's not true. Even back then, it was not true. During this time period, when the cavalry made it to Minnesota to end this uprising, there was several white people that were trying their best to protect the Indians. They were trying to see that injustice would not befall the Indians. These were white people that were fair. So they were protecting the Indians. This must be known, because it proves to you that not all the white people back then were against the Indians. So they sheltered them. Sometimes they even hid them from the soldiers. So that has to be known. They were the heroes. They stepped in and tried to help the Indians. Yeah, not all white people are bad. Not all Indians are good. So this is that hanging is what took place today. Yeah, 38. There has never been a mass hanging this big since then in America. And Abraham Lincoln signed the order. Yeah. In one instant, he's freeing the slaves. In another instant, he's condemning. He's condemning Indians. He's condemning 38 Dakota warriors to be hung. Yeah, they had to whittle it down. Yeah. First of all, Abraham Lincoln didn't want anybody to get hung. But the re-election is coming. Yeah, the next election is coming, and if he wants to stay in the presidency, he better do something to make sure he gets votes. And the sentiment in America is to hate Indians. So instead of saying, okay, hang them all, he's saying just get the ones that committed the most serious crimes. See, he had to have some of them hung, otherwise he would lose the presidency. Yeah. So there you have it. Yeah, some more this is stuff that people don't talk about. You have to look at the whole situation. You have to examine the whole thing before you can really have an opinion on that. And part of that process includes acknowledging that there were white people that were trying to help these Indians. They weren't trying to Christianize them. They were trying to help them because they knew that most of the white people there hated Indians. They knew that. So they were trying to protect them. Yeah. So when they had their 100 or over 100 years anniversary there, the Dakota people have been seeking reconciliation. They're saying, yes, you live here now, but we are connected to this land, and we need to find a way to live here in peace. So they've been having reconciliation services, inviting the local white leaders of Mankato to come, but they don't show up. White people do go, yeah? There are white people who do go there, but the leaders, they don't go. They don't show up. So the Dakota people have been seeking reconciliation, forgiveness for their part, But the white government officials refuse to accept it. And they will not apologize for their part. So they have not apologized. And it's over 100 years now. So, again, you have to be careful. Not all white people are this way. Because there are white people who do go to these reconciliation efforts. It's just not the leaders that are there. Yeah? So, anyway, I just wanted to touch on that. I don't want to dwell on that all the time because when people do that, they end up getting drunk in the emotion, and they don't see this in a clear-headed way. You have to look at it as completely as possible, and you have to take into consideration that, yeah, some of the Indians fucked up. Yeah, they were not all innocent. They could have responded to this in a different way. But some of them were also good. They were good people. And you look at the white side, the white people's side, yes, there were a lot of white people that hated Indians. They wanted all Indians to be exterminated. They were calling for the extermination of all Indians. And the really funny, interesting part is that same time period, we have this feminist from America, this white feminist named Susan B. Anthony, who is fighting for the rights of women to be considered equal to men. She was fighting for the right for women to be allowed to vote in elections and for equal civil rights for all women. This same woman was also calling for the extermination of all Indians in the United States of America. See, when we grow up in elementary school and we learn about this in school, in public school, we learn about Susan B. Anthony and how she was fighting for the rights of women, and eventually she won. There was even a Susan B. Anthony coin. I think it was a 50-cent piece, or was it a silver dollar? I can't remember what it was. But there was even a Susan B. Anthony coin. And a lot of women got mad. A lot of feminists got mad and said, well, she should have had a dollar bill, not a coin. Yeah. And everybody in America focuses on her being the heroine who fought for women's civil rights. But people don't realize that she was also calling for the extermination of all Indians from off the face of the earth. That's the truth. Google it. You will find it too. So when people stand for civil rights or human rights, usually it's selective, yeah, just for certain people. But Indians must be exterminated. That sentiment is still there in America. You have immigrants coming in from Arab countries and African countries and South American countries, and they're all racist against Indians, even though they're colored people too. Yeah, so we are the least accepted group in America, but not all oppressors are white. Yeah, not all Indians are good. Not all white people are bad. And we have to remember that. We have to look at as much of that picture as we can. Yeah, we have to. Our very health depends on it. Because if we just focus on one part, we make ourselves sick. And we influence each other to become sick too. Then we're violating that concept of mitakoye oyasi by trying to separate ourselves, trying to keep ourselves separate from one another. That's what led to our ancestors' downfall. They did the same thing. Most of our ancestors were destroyed because they did this way too. They hated each other because of the color of their skin, because of others' skin color. That's written in Lakota Star Knowledge. This happened before, and it's happening again. When the nation becomes mostly dualistic, the earth is going to get ready to cleanse herself again. But she's going to tell you where to go for safety. But the only way you're going to know where that is to be in communication with her. And the only way you're going to do that is living in peace. Yeah, that you communicate as a human and not as a nationality, but as a human. And your message is meant for all, and not just people of a certain skin color or language or religion, but to everyone. Then you have a connection to the earth, then you're living in harmony with nature. Then she tells you, and you know, you listen, you hear where to go for safety. That's how a handful of ancestors from all nations were able to survive. Most of them were destroyed because they were dualistic. And it's happening again today. Most people, even among Indians, are dualistic. That's something to think about, yeah? So, when you look at this experience, you have to be careful that you don't get caught up in the emotion and start communicating from emotion only, because it's going to cause you to lose clarity. And when you lose clarity, you become an oppressor. Yeah? So you become just like the people who've oppressed your nation. This is trying to cure a cold with the flu, and it's not going to work. It's only going to bring disaster everywhere. Yeah? So, for you Indian racists, the white people, they're not going to disappear. And when they do, so will we. Because we're all connected to each other. That's natural law. Yeah? So, something to think about. Yeah? And I like I said, the most important thing is, when you look at this, you have to make sure you have peace within yourself. Because if you don't, the tendency is to become a racist, and you're only hurting yourself the most. Yeah, and you're hurting others, but you're hurting yourself the most, and you're not a good father when you're that way. You're not a good mother when you're that way. You're not honoring those who fell, and you're not being compassionate. So we have to keep these in mind. Yeah, we have to think about that. The reality begins within. So I just ask that you think about it. Okay. So I'll just leave it at that, and just take time. When you think of incidents like this, is to honor those who were the victims, but you have to complete that picture by praying for those who were the oppressors. Because if we don't, we're giving them power. Yeah, this is how we take power away from oppressors, by praying for them. but do it in a way of humility. Yeah, that you're not doing this in a way to belittle at all, but then you do it in a humble way, because what we do affects everything around us and inside us. It's the reason. And people can change. Pray for those who are being hurt, who are in pain, and those who are causing it, so that balance and peace can be established somewhere. Okay? That's our goal, yeah, to live in peace as humans. Concerning the past, we should learn from it and come to peace with it and honor those who were victims and pray for those who were abusers. Because that time is gone now. It's over. But we need to learn from it and come to peace with it so that we don't make those same misdecisions. Yeah, we don't, so that we will make healthier, smarter choices in our lives so that we'll have a healthier future. So it's not about dwelling on the past, it's about learning from the past. Whenever I talk about things from the past, it's never to get mad, to get you mad at people or anything like that. It's to learn from it. So when I talk about things from the past that are kind of upsetting or sad and you get angry, that's okay, but don't stay there. Don't stay there, because you're going to lose your clarity and you're going to lose peace from yourself. And just to express your anger without hurting anybody or anyone, without becoming a racist, without becoming an oppressor, and then just let it go, and then start learning from it. That's the most important thing, yeah, is to learn from that past. And remember that those people, they're gone now. We can honor them, but we shouldn't be angry. We need to be at peace with the situation. We need to learn from that. We shouldn't hate, because when we hate, we don't think right. We lose clarity. We trap ourselves in an emotion and we lose our balance. We lose our way. And then we become just as hateful as the people who hung these Dakota 38. Now, a couple of years later, 2 more Dakota warriors that were involved in some serious crimes were caught in Canada, and they were sent back to Minnesota, so they were hanged a few days later or the following year. And so today they call it the Dakota 38 plus 2 Remembrance. So every year they have a memorial ride from, I think it's Crow Creek, South Dakota, because a lot of descendants were placed there, which is far away from Minnesota. Several weeks ago, they have this memorial ride that they do to remember the Dakota 38 plus 2. And mostly it's a good experience, but they still do experience racism. When they go through some of these small towns in eastern South Dakota, you get some white people cussing them out and making fun of them and stuff like that. But mostly they do have a good experience. Churches take them in and feed them and let them come to the church and warm up, and they take their horses to farms in barns and have them warm up and give them hay and let the horses rest and stuff like that, and they help them out. Because the whole reason for this is to bring people together. It's not to separate. It's not to blame somebody, to point the finger at somebody. It's to bring people together. So this is what they do today. Yeah, so it is a sad event. The leader of the Dakota people, his name was Taoyate Duta, his Red Nation, it was called, his name. After this thing was over, this uprising, the so-called uprising, he was captured and killed. And the farmer who killed him skinned his face. They took his face off, and he sold it to somebody. And that next World's Fair, they used to have something called the World's Fair every year. And they had it in Chicago that one year. And so they put this guy's face on display. Can you imagine that? In 18-something, they had this guy's face. No head, just his skin. They had it tied around something so you could see the face of this chief. this Dakota chief. These people were just inhuman, just incredibly hateful to do something like that. And people talk about ISIL, this ISIS, and the Taliban, and Al Qaeda, and all these terrorist groups, and and American people were doing even worse. It's just horrible what they were doing. Like I said, during that time when they were taking the Indians after they captured them and they had to surrender before the hanging, they were marching the Indians through some of these Minnesota towns. Like I said, there were farmers' wives that were running up to the children and throwing rocks at them and grabbing the babies and slamming them to posts and bashing their heads in. And it's just incredible how much hatred they had against Indian people. So before you start talking about how bad these terrorists are, just look at American history. They've done the same thing. Not only to Indians, but in Vietnam, they've done things there too. They've cut people's heads off and used them for soccer balls. And it's incredible how some people have such hatred. The stupid things, the stupid, inhuman things that they do to each other. They're all based on hatred. It's just horrible. But we can't spend our time on that. Yeah, we have to learn from that so that we don't do that. So that we go forward together and start seeing one another not as Indian and white, but as human beings. Because, in the beginning, in Lakota Star Knowledge, it says that in the beginning of the earth, the humans came. They were called Ikjeoyate. That means common people. It doesn't say anything about the skin color or language or the look or whatever. It describes us as a species. That we are all Ikjeoyate. We're all human beings. And that when we see it like that, and we start to take the time to get to know one another, there's good and bad wherever you go. Every skin color, there's good and bad. So this is something we have to keep in mind. That's the message I want to say on that, is that that's something we have to learn from so that we don't repeat it. Because if we hate white people just because of this incident, then we're just as bad as the racist. We're racist too when we do that. Then that's not going to solve anything. That's like trying to cure the common cold with the HIV virus, and it's just not going to work. It's going to make things worse. Two negatives don't make a positive in reality. So think about that. That's something we need to learn from so that we don't repeat that. Because we don't repeat it against each other. Just because somebody's different. So we'll just leave it at that. And again, honor those who've fallen, and honor all victims in this world who have been put down by an abuser, and pray for the abusers because they have an illness. Let's remember and honor all victims all over the world, not just in the Indian world, but all over the world, because we are all Ikjeoyate. We are all humans. We are all grandchildren of our grandmother Earth. And she gives us everything that we could ever need. We all breathe the same air. We all live on the same earth. We all drink the same water. And we all use fire to live. And we all bleed red. That's the most important thing. And all our babies speak the same language. So let's think on all these people, the girls that were taken by terrorist groups and used for whatever. Let's remember all victims and honor them. And pray for those that are the abusers, because they're sick. They're very, very sick, and it's dangerous because it's killing a lot of people in this world. Just to reiterate what I already said, and that when we look at these kind of incidents in history, that these things need to be known, but we have to handle it with care. Because if we just say things like, see, this is what the white man did, that disproves to you that the white man is no good. See, if that's all you're going to do, then you dishonor these victims. You dishonor them when all you do is use that incident to fuel your hatred. You are dishonoring the ancestors. This is not their way. So that's why I really need to emphasize that. There was good and bad happening on both sides. Some of these attacks that were happening in Minnesota, they were real. They were attacking. There was chaos. Because a lot of people want to say the Indians were justified in doing what they did. This is not true. There is never justification for oppression. See, the Indians were being oppressed by this trading post guy. He was oppressing them. And they could have dealt with it in a different way, but the way that they chose brought serious consequences. And it was a very ugly incident. It was not entirely, oh, the Indians were the good people and the white people were bad people. It wasn't like that. That's too fantasy to see it like that, because there was a little bit of both on each side. There was a little bit of both on each side. So we can't point our fingers at this entity and that entity. No. What we have to do is say, okay, look at what the mentality was back then, and look at what was fueling that mentality. The media played a huge role in fueling American sentiment to call for the extermination of Indians. And a lot of times they would fabricate a lot of things that didn't even happen. We can't be blaming anybody here. What we need to do is say, okay, look at what happened, look at what led up to that. And we have to see that it's because both sides had two different ways of thinking. And that there was no meeting, nothing there to see each other as humans, because the sentiment on the American side was to see Indians as less than human. The sentiment on the Indian side was that all white people take and take and take. These sentiments were based on loose information. It seemed like both sides were looking for reasons to justify their actions towards each other. Nobody wanted to say, okay, we gotta somehow work this out. The white leaders in those days were not in that way of thinking. It was a horrible situation. It was injustice towards the Indians. But we have to learn from it. And that's what the Dakota people are trying to do. Like I said earlier, they always call for these reconciliation meetings, but just a little bit white people show up. I mean, there are some. That's the good thing. At least there's some showing up. But they see themselves as the victims. Isn't that ridiculous? These descendants of these Swedish farmers, they see themselves as the victims. And I think that's just ridiculous. It should be, we need to accept what happened, but we need to learn from it so we know where to go. We're both living here. We have to find a way to live. We don't have to be friends, but there has to be an understanding. That's the road we need to go on. That's the peace road. And this is how we do things in our own lives. making the best out of it, difficult situations, and learning from it. We have to use that same way of thinking in incidents like this. And as long as we do our part, we're sending out healthy communication. And that's going to come back to us and help us in our healing. And should they respond with unhealthy communication, well, guess what? That returns to them 4 times as strong. And it only makes things worse for themselves. We can deal with it as long as we're healthy. And it will not do anything to us. And they only hurt themselves more. So I just want you to think about that. Nothing more. No, I'm not going to say this is the right way, this is the wrong way. No. I think what has to happen is discussion. What has to happen is to have an exchange of ideas and say, okay, well, now where do we go from here? But the sad reality is that most of America is not ready to accept Native American Indian people as equals. That's the sad reality, I'm afraid to say. And most non-Native people who want to help Natives, they have preconceived notions. And they look at our culture through their eyes, and that's ethnocentrism. And that's not going to help. Their hearts may be in the right place, but their minds are not. See, even though they want to help, they're doing it in an ethnocentric way, which is showing you that their heart and mind are not working together. We have to find a way. All I ask is that you think about it. Thank you very much for taking time to tune in and listen. We don't have a word for goodbye because for us everything is circular, so we'll be back around again. So instead we say until next time, which in Lakota is Toksha Ake. To read more about Lakota Star Knowledge spirituality, you can read my book called Wichocha Otechike. You can see the book cover on the right side of this screen. This book contains the information to what I talk about on my Lakota spirituality videos. To purchase this book, please click below where it says Show More. Clicking on that link will open up the description below, and there you will see a link called To Purchase My Books. As you will see, it's an eBay link. Click on that eBay link, and there you will see the information to get this book. Lila Pila Mayelo. Thank you very much.